Hello there. Welcome to the Saroy channel, wherever you are in the world, and so much love to each and every one of you. How are you doing? I hope you're doing remarkably well. I'm doing great, thank you very much, and I'm so delighted you've joined me for part 3 of our story, because this is one hell of a story and I hope you're enjoying it as much as I am. So we are on the third part of our story, and basically Missy has discovered that the man in the red plaid shirt that she's been seeing in the woodgrove is not her grandfather. She's actually encountered a ghost, and this has come as quite a shock to her, because she didn't even believe that ghosts were real. Well, maybe she did, but she certainly didn't expect to see one in the middle of the day. And she'd seen this ghost before on one separate occasion, believing he was her grandfather, and then on a second occasion she realizes he's a young man with blonde hair. And now her grandfather is realizing that the ghost that Missy is seeing is an old friend from the past, and we're about to find out what his story is, why this young man is possibly haunting the woodgrove. And of course there's a Bigfoot involved in this story, who appears to find it hilariously funny that Missy has been chasing after a ghost and wondering why the ghost is vanishing before her eyes. So let's continue with our story, shall we? Well, what your grandmother is trying to tell you, Missy, is that being wealthy is not always being rich on the inside. But you can be wealthy, have a lot of money, and be incredibly fulfilled with your life. Your grandmother is not trying to tell you that being wealthy is a bad thing. It can be a very good thing. And it's wonderful to be prosperous on the outside and on the inside. But some of us may be poor on the outside and rich on the inside. Others rich on the outside and poor on the inside. But what you really want is a happy balance. Because being prosperous and fulfilled, both on the inside and the outside, is what every man should be. Do you understand, Missy? That is exactly what God would want for every one of us. Yes, I understand, Gramps. Oh, please, won't you go on with this story of yours? You're keeping us on tenterhooks, love. I will if you will stop interrupting me. Let's see, where was I? Ah, yes, Walter was my very best friend, even though he was not a brother of mine. But he was closer to me than any of my siblings were. Growing up, we were practically inseparable. Much like myself, he also came from a poor background. His parents often struggled to feed the family, but somehow they always managed. Both my parents had fixed opinions about life, never dared to dream big for themselves. My mother's favorite words were, "I know my place." I remember when I drew a picture of this very house that we're sitting in right now, even as I speak. I told my family I was going to build this place, live in it one day, on a large piece of Farmer Eldon's land. My mother practically scolded me for having such absurd, far-fetched ideas above my station. Goodness gracious, Cole, you're such a fanciful child, honestly. I hate to tell you, love, but you're never going to live in a house like that. It's a pipe dream. You must face the fact that our kind, well, good fortune never happens to simple folk like us. But why not? I asked. Because, love, poor folk don't live like the other half of society do. We work hard for a living, don't we? With blood, sweat and tears, and it's not easy. We'll never ever make the kind of money to support a luxurious lifestyle. It's impossible. We don't have the privileges of richer folk, and we need to accept that our lives will never ever be easy. We all love each other, don't we? And as far as I'm concerned, that's what really matters. Your mother's right, Cole. You need to be realistic, son, my father would say. Don't delude yourself into dreaming big over your life. You'll end up becoming very, very disheartened, feeling very crushed, when all your aspirations turn into smoke. And I don't want you being bitterly disappointed, son. People like us, we work hard for every single penny. And I'm sorry to say, but that's the way it is." "I don't care what you say," I stubbornly insisted. "One day Farmer Eldon will give me a large piece of his big ranch, and I'll build a beautiful large house on it. I'll raise a family. I'll start up my own business and build houses for a living, like the one I've drawn on this very same piece of paper." My mother rolled her eyes at the back of her head in exasperation, as if to say, "What is this one like?" My father returned her very cynical look. It was almost as if he was saying, "Goodness gracious me, this son of ours is completely delusional." I was constantly persuaded by my mother that I needed to accept that people like us, from very simplistic, humble origins, were never meant to be wealthy, as we came from the wrong side of the track, so to speak, even though in America at the time we weren't supposed to have a class distinction. But back in the day, no matter what they may tell you, we definitely did. There is no doubt about it in my mind. This, of course, was my parents' warped mindset. My brothers and sisters were equally as sceptical and scathing, actually laughing at me for my fancies, when I suggested one day Farmer Eldon himself would give me a large chunk of his land. As for them, not only was the idea implausible, but absolutely ludicrous. "What's wrong with you, Cole? People like us will never ever be rich," I was told over and over again. But my best friend Walter, now he believed in my dreams. When I showed him the pictures I'd drawn up of this very house I am living in now with you, he'd say, "I know Farmer Eldon will give you a chunk of his ranch. I know it, and then you can build a fantastic dream home on it. It will happen for you." "How do you know?" I would ask him, very happy to have a friend who actually believed that my dreams were possible. "Because you believe it will happen. And if you do believe, anything is possible, because my mother says the Bible says that." I do remember when I went to see Farmer Eldon himself. He took one long look at me, and he actually laughed out loud. "Ha, ha, ha, ha," when I told him that I wanted to work for him in return for a chunk of his land. The man himself thought my idea was ridiculous. I'll never forget his amused face. At the time he had very strong, strapping men working for him, and they were enviably strong. I mean, I was so puny by contrast, I have to admit. And they were working on his property for him. So why on earth would he want me? But I'll tell you this, I wasn't remotely discouraged or put out. "You're a tiny runt of a thing," he told me. "You'll never amount to much, son. But I tell you what, if you fancy showing me what you can do around the place, be my guest. Who am I to stop you? But I hate to say this, son. My guess is by the time the day is over, you'll be begging me to go home. There's a lot of work to be done around this place, back-breaking stuff, let me tell you. I've had full-grown men begging me to reduce their workload. So I don't hold out much hope for you staying here very long." "I'm going to surprise you," I told him. "I've got to hand it to you, son. You've got balls, I'll give you that. Well, let me tell you, I made myself indispensable to Farmer Eldon. He began to rely on me in a way he could not rely on some of his most trusted workers. Finally, he agreed to give me a chunk of his property, on the condition I worked for him free of charge for 10 years. It wasn't any skin off his nose. The large piece of land that I wanted was pretty redundant for his steers. The land itself was hilly and heavily wooded. He could easily let that part go. By the time that Farmer Eldon gave me the land that he had promised me, I was not only indispensable, but I had become a son to him, so that in the end he was practically begging me to take the land as a gift. He wanted me to have it. My parents never believed it would ever happen, and when it did, I taught them all a very invaluable lesson, that if you dream big enough, nothing is impossible for you. I lifted that family of mine out of poverty. But let's get back to the story of Walter, shall we? When I was about 18 years old, I asked Farmer Alden to hire Walter to help manage the ranch with me. At that stage of the game, I was practically running his ranch single-handedly, with an enviable efficiency that stunned the Eldons, who were grateful for my input, because they were getting on in years by then. Whenever I asked Farmer Eldon to do something, he would usually oblige my request. He trusted my opinions on things, you know. Farmer Eldon agreed to hire Walter, and pay him quite handsomely. I had in mind that Walter could take over from me in running the ranch when I started up my own little business and built my own home. Walter fell hard for Farmer Eldon's daughter Marilyn. She was a beautiful young girl, bashful, demure. But the first day she laid eyes on Walter, there were fireworks between the two of them. I remember thinking to myself, what have I done here, bringing these two together? The Eldons are not going to like this one little bit. Ostensibly, in the beginning, Farmer Eldon actively discouraged the relationship between his daughter and Walter, which I think he deemed as inappropriate. But when he saw what a fine man Walter actually was, and observed how much Marilyn loved him, he realized Walter would be an asset to the family, and would do a great job in the efficient running of the ranch. In the end, he looked on Walter as a son. One day Farmer Eldon's wife told Walter she wanted to see him in private about a very personal matter. Walter became quite nervous about this little rendezvous with her. He was concerned that she looked down on his relationship with her daughter. But there was a great shift taking place in America back then, about 10 years after World War II. There was a less obvious class divide. America was fast becoming the land of the free. You were seeing it all over the world, people marrying into higher classes, which would never have happened before the war. Never. "You love my daughter, don't you, Walter?" she said to my friend. Walter told her, "I love her more than life itself, ma'am." "Well, then you need to do the right thing by her, don't you, Walter?" she said. "You mean marry her? You want me to marry your daughter, ma'am?" Farmer Eldon's wife nodded. "Don't look so shocked, Walter," she laughed. "I know exactly what you're thinking. But things in America are different these days, you know. Common folk are marrying people from well-to-do backgrounds all the time. You hear of countesses marrying the doormen. It's a free world now, Walter, and we should grab it with both hands. Besides anything else, you're very good for Marilyn, and since you've come along, she has blossomed so much. She's always been such a shy little thing, but you've brought her out of her shell, and as a mother, I want the very best for my girl. We had her very late in life, you know. I was 48 years old when she was born. I want a good man to take care of her when I'm gone, and you do very nicely, Walter." "I would love nothing better than to marry your daughter, Mrs. Eldon. But I want to do the right thing by her before I can propose to her. I need to save up for a diamond ring." "Please don't call me Mrs. Eldon, Walter. It's really not necessary now. You're practically family. I would prefer it if you called me by my first name, Catherine. As for the ring, I've thought of the very thing. Now you wait over there." Moments later, Farmer Eldon's wife returned, with a little box in her hand, which she opened and presented to my friend. It was a beautiful sapphire and diamond engagement ring. "I can't possibly take this, ma'am," he said. "This must be very precious to you." "It is precious to me, but of course you can take it, Walter. You're like a son to me now. My daughter Marilyn is head over heels in love with you. And honestly, you belong together. I know you will be a fabulous husband to her, and I couldn't ask for any more. Besides, my husband loves you very much, and I know he will be very happy to leave the ranch in your judicious charge one day, when it becomes too much for him. This ring belonged to my grandmother, you know, and I would like you very much to have it. You can give it to my daughter. But first of all, I need you to ask my husband for my daughter's hand in marriage. He doesn't know about any of this. I want it to come from you. I may have more modern views about many things these days, Walter, but I do like marriage proposals to be orchestrated in the old-fashioned way. Now you can keep the ring, but I need to keep the box. You'll have to go to town and buy a special box for it before you present it to my daughter. As you can imagine, Walter thought all his Christmases had come at once. The Eldons were asking him to marry their daughter. Well, Mrs. Eldon was. And there was nothing he wanted more in the entire world. At the time, I was building this house on this very property. And what was the first thing Walter did after his little rendezvous with Mrs. Eldon? He put the sapphire and diamond engagement ring in the pocket of his red plaid shirt. He dropped everything he was doing and ran across Farmer Eldon's ranch to this part of the property, which is now my land, where I was building this very house. He wanted to tell me his great news. I was his best friend, after all. We told each other everything. I'll never forget that day in a hurry. Me and my brothers were building this house very industriously. All hands were on deck at the time. Even my father was lending a hand. Walter came bursting through the trees, wearing his red plaid jacket, his blonde hair frolicking wildly around his face. But there was something about his eyes that morning. They were turquoise almost in colour. They were shining with so much joy. I knew at once, with just one glance of that animated face of his, that he was bursting to tell me some great news. I could never have envisaged what he was about to tell me. By the time he reached me, he was completely out of breath. And Walter was a super-fit young man, strong as an ox he was, so he must have run like a cheetah to tell me this news that day. And boy, did he have something to tell me. "What is it, Walter?" I asked, chuckling. "What's up with you, bro? You look like you've dropped a penny and found three." I waited for his fast breathing to subside. He said to me, Go, look at me. You're never going to believe it. Marilyn's mother has practically begged me to marry her daughter." "What?" I said. "What, are you being serious?" "Perfectly serious. I thought you was going to tell me to stay away from Marilyn, that I'd never ever be good enough for her daughter. Instead, she told me that things were changing here in America, and that it wasn't uncommon for more common folk to marry the well-to-do. She gave me her blessing to marry Marilyn. Can you believe that, Cole? She told me that I made her daughter very happy, and that was all she cared about. She also believes I would manage the ranch very well." I slapped Walter on the back. "Why are you surprised, Walter? Don't sell yourself short. The Eldons love you. They know you will be great for their daughter." I couldn't believe she was giving me her blessing, bro. She told me, "Go and ask Farmer Eldon if you can marry Marilyn." And you know what he said to me, Cole? "No, what did he say?" I asked. "My guess he was as pleased as Punch. He knows you'll be an asset to running the ranch and taking care of his daughter. I'm sure he was terribly pleased. He said nothing would give me greater pleasure than to have you as a son-in-law, Walter. Can you believe that, Cole? I couldn't believe it myself." "That's brilliant news, Walter," I said once again, slapping him on the back. "I'm very happy for you. Marilyn loves the bones of you. I hope you've already popped the question to her, now that you've got Farmer Eldon's permission." Of course I haven't, said Walter, smiling at me bashfully. I came to tell you the good news first. You're my best friend, after all, and I always run things by you first. Besides, I want to make the proposal very special. I was hoping you could give me some ideas about what to do when I ask Marilyn to be my wife. You're very good at thinking out of the box, Walter. I want Marilyn to remember this proposal in the years to come, so it's something she can tell our grandchildren about. I want to do something wildly romantic, but at the same time rather quirky, if you know what I mean. I pulled a face. You've got me there, Walter. I'll have to think of something for you. I remember my brother Reuben was hammering nails into the wooden decking. He looked up and smiled warmly at Walter, as he'd overheard our conversation. Well, it seems congratulations are in order, Walter. But aren't you forgetting something big? You're going to need a diamond engagement ring to ask for Marilyn's hand in marriage. I'm sure a girl like her is going to expect something rather special that'll set you back a pretty penny. The Eldons are a wealthy family. You can't buy her a cheap trinket from a second-hand store. So what are you going to do? Don't listen to Reuben, I teased. He's always got to put a spanner in the works. I'm sure that Marilyn will be happy with any ring you buy her. Oh, that's sorted, said Walter, grinning from ear to ear and digging hastily into his pockets. Where the hell is it? He said, an expression of alarm developing on his face. Where the hell is it? Where is it? What are you looking for? Asked Reuben. Your face has gone all white. Oh, my goodness, gasped Walter. There's a bloody hole in my pocket. Look at this. Can you believe it? I must have dropped it. How the hell am I going to find it? Walter began to panic. He ran his hands through his blonde hair in exasperation, and his eyes were exceedingly troubled. Whatever is the matter, Walter? I asked him. Mrs. Eldon gave me a diamond engagement ring to give to Marilyn. It belonged to her grandmother. She said I needed to give it to her daughter when I asked her for a hand in marriage. I must have dropped it somewhere in the grove. I was running here to tell you the good news. I think it must have fallen through the hole in my pocket. What the hell am I going to do? What is Mrs. Eldon going to think if she knows I've lost her precious, very valuable ring? How could I be so damn stupid? What the hell is wrong with me? She told me to put it away safely, to find a pretty box for it. And I put it in the pocket of my plaid jacket, and it's got a hole in it. I've only gone and lost it. I'm such an idiot. Are you insane, Walter? I said. Why would you even consider putting an expensive engagement ring in your pocket? Why on earth did you not put the ring in a box, like Mrs. Eldon suggested you do? Or ask her to keep it for you until you found a box, for goodness sake? That would be the logical, very sensible thing to do. What were you thinking, bro? I clearly wasn't thinking. That's the problem. I was so excited about asking Marilyn to be my wife that I just didn't think about what I was doing. What the hell is wrong with me? I'm sorry to say this, Walter, but that diamond engagement ring could be anywhere around here, said Reuben. Look at the place. Rocks, trees, stones, foliage, grass. It could slip behind a blade of grass for all you know. Your chances of finding it are pretty slim, to downright close to impossible. I don't mean to go out on a tangent about this, or to make you feel worse than you already do. But what induced you, Walter, to put a valuable diamond ring loose in your pocket? I can't imagine how Mrs. Eldon is going to feel that you've lost her precious, very valuable ring. It's not exactly a good omen, is it? Nor is it an auspicious start for marrying her daughter. I wouldn't want to be wearing your boots when you have to tell her that you've lost her grandmother's ring. That's not going to go down very well. Don't be so unkind, Reuben, I interjected. These things happen. We all make mistakes from time to time, and if the worst comes to the worst, we can use Mr. Finley's metal detector. I do happen to know he owns one. That man has many oddities. I know he uses it to find old coins and mementos from the Civil War. I'm sure we could borrow it from him. He's a jolly good sport, and will gladly lend a hand to help us find the ring." "How could I have been so stupid?" said Walter, letting out a wail. "How am I ever going to find that beautiful ring? Supposing I don't, what will Mrs. Eldon think of me? Reuben's right, Cole. This is not looking good for me. Maybe after this unfortunate state of affairs, she'll be practically begging me not to marry her daughter. You know that's not going to happen, bro. The Eldons love you. Granted, they're not going to be impressed with you for losing a family heirloom, but there are worse things that can happen for people. I'm sure they care more about you making their daughter happy. But if you don't find the ring, you will have to buy another one." "That means it's going to be a long time before I can marry Marilyn. I can't possibly propose without a ring, can I?" said Walter, looking rather mortified. "Calm down," I said. "We will retrace your footsteps, and then I'm sure we will find it. And failing that, we'll get hold of Mr. Finley's metal detector. All is not lost yet. We might be lucky. Maybe the ring will be easy to spot. But what if your brother Reuben is right? What if it slipped into the soil? Then I will never ever find it. I told you, don't get discouraged. We will borrow Mr. Finley's metal detector. Those things can work miracles, you know. Not all hope is lost yet." I persuaded all my brothers to stop what we were doing at once, on the building project. We began to frantically search through the grove of trees and along the meadow, retracing Walter's footsteps for that diamond engagement ring. I must admit, I couldn't believe Walter had been foolish enough to put the ring in his pocket. It really was bad luck that there was a hole in his pocket. In truth, I didn't feel good about finding the ring, because it could be anywhere. And furthermore, if we did use Mr. Finley's metal detector, the chances of recovering the ring were still pretty remote. But I didn't want to discourage my friend, or make him feel worse about things than he already did. Nor did I want to rub salt into the wound. We began to search high and low for the diamond ring, but it really was like looking for a needle in a haystack. And as our attempts to locate the ring kept failing, Walter became incessantly more desperate. He began frantically searching, looking behind shrubbery, bending back grass to look in between the blades, hoping to find the ring. And then something happened that we never ever saw coming. In Walter's desperate attempts to find the ring, he succeeded in antagonizing a copperhead snake while bending down in the grass to look for it. Before he could get away in time, Walter had been struck by the snake on the cheek and bitten. As old as you think I am, Missy, I'm very glad to tell you that in the 1950s we did have anti-venom. The first anti-venom was actually developed against the cobra in 1895 by a renowned scientist called Albert Calmet. So there was anti-venom available for a copperhead bite, if you got treatment in 20 hours. Failing that, you would surely die. But we knew we would get Walter help in time. Well, that's what we assumed anyway. Walter grabbed his cheek. His eyes grew wide. The copperhead snake scuttled away. "I've been bitten, bro. Did you see that?" he said. "I've been bitten." "Just calm down. We'll get you to a hospital and they'll pump you with anti-venom," I assured him. The trouble was Walter had a bad reaction to the copperhead snake bite. Almost like an anaphylactic shock, if you like. But the position of the snake bite was very disadvantageous. His whole face swelled up. His airways were blocked. He couldn't breathe, and this was happening very fast. I'd never seen anything like it before. And I hasten to say, by the time the medics arrived on the scene to take him to hospital, It was too late. We were beyond saving him. His body reacted so adversely to the venom, far too quickly, so that we couldn't get him help in time. I did, of course, try to open an airway by cutting open an area on his neck, but nothing worked. He was dead. I stared at my grandfather incredulously.
So Walter died on the property while looking for a diamond ring. Do you think he's still looking for the ring now, Gramps? Not realizing he's dead?
It's a very strong possibility, said my grandfather. On the day he died, he was wearing his red plaid shirt or jacket, if you like.
But what happened to Marilyn when she discovered that her beloved had died?
I asked. Marilyn was absolutely devastated. A year later, I hate to tell you this, but she was found drowned in the family pond. She had tied bricks to her feet. She said she couldn't go on without her Walter.
She killed herself? Are you being serious? It's like a Greek tragedy, isn't it? You can't even make this stuff up. That is the saddest thing I've ever heard. It's sadder than Romeo and Juliet. What about the ring? Did the Eldon family ever recover the missing diamond ring?
I asked my grandfather. No, unfortunately the diamond and sapphire engagement ring was never ever found. Actually, Mrs. Eldon wasn't upset about the diamond ring being lost. She was far more devastated to have lost her future son-in-law-to-be. The irony is that Walter, had he not been frantically searching for the diamond ring, he'd have never been struck by a copperhead. It was like a bizarre set of idiosyncratic unfortunate circumstances that conspired to take down poor Walter's life. The Eldons were very broken up after that event. They sold up the ranch and moved away. They were never the same again, and didn't live long after the demise of their daughter.
Oh, how tragic! What an extraordinary story,
said my grandmother, mopping away a few tears from her eyes.
It's so sad, very, very sad. To think that Walter's ghost is probably still searching for that diamond and sapphire engagement ring to give to his beloved. He knows he needs that diamond ring to propose to her. Oh dear, oh dear. That's why Missy saw him, isn't it? He hasn't crossed over to the other side. What a devastating chain of events. Missy was telling me there's a hairy man in the grove as well. He was laughing at her because she was chasing a ghost. Isn't that right, Missy dear? Yes, it's right. There was a hairy man in the grove laughing at me, Gramps.
You've seen the hairy man? He asked. Well, I never. You must be special, Missy, for a wild man to show himself to you. They've been sighted all over this property over the years. At first, when I heard about these things, I thought it was a tall, fictitious story, until one day I saw a wild man myself. Mr. Eldon would tell me that these things were real, but I never believed it for a moment. I was about 19 years old at the time, working on the Eldons' property. One of my jobs was to clean out the stable block. We had a white mare called Silver Birch, who had never been the same after losing her foal to a stillbirth. I had watched her deliver that foal myself, with Farmer Eldon at my side, trying to resuscitate her dead foal. It was born dead. It was heartbreaking for the mare. In the end, we quickly removed the foal from the mother as discreetly as we could. Most horses, and even animals alike, tend to bounce back from a tragedy like that. But Silver Birch was a sensitive soul. She was never quite the same after losing her foal. Before she had been an easy-going, happy-go-lucky horse. But after the stillbirth she became very anxious. We had a breeding stallion on the property, but we kept Silver Birch well away from him, deciding we didn't want her to be impregnated again, because if she lost a second foal, it wouldn't be good for her mental well-being. I would regularly visit Silver Birch to give her special attention. She had become quite temperamental and rather highly strung after losing her foal. Months after the event, I have to say. It was late one afternoon when I paid Silver Birch a visit. I liked her very much. She was vulnerable, so I had an inclination to be rather protective towards her. It was growing dark, and I heard the soft chanting sound as I entered Silver Birch's stable. I remember thinking to myself, what the hell is that? I'd never heard a sound like that before. It was soothing. When I entered her stable block, I noticed that Silver Birch seemed incredibly calm, but the chanting stopped almost at once as I made my approach, and that was when I first saw a wild man. He had his arms right around Silver Birch, his face nuzzling into her neck. He looked rather alarmed when he saw me, and hurriedly bolted out of the stable, faster than you could say Jack Robinson. But he'd been there long enough for me to get a jolly good look at him. He must have been about 10 foot tall, I suspect. Very intimidating to look at. I will say this. After he visited the mare, Silver Birch calmed down significantly. His chanting appeared to have healed her. The hairy man performed miracles on her, and one day when she was in season, I discovered she was missing from her stable block. It was in the middle of the night. I'd been having dinner with the Eldons and decided to check up on my favourite mare. Imagine my shock when I discovered Silver Birch was missing from her stable. I didn't panic, of course, but I went to search for her. I found her cavorting with the male stallion in his very cushy enclosure. My first thought was, how the hell did Silver Birch get in here? And my second thought was, she's definitely been impregnated. The male stallion looked reasonably satisfied with himself, like the cat who'd got the cream. I was stunned. I didn't know how this had happened. Farmer Eldon would not be best pleased. He didn't want Silver Birch to be pregnant again. And then I saw him. I knew at once who'd brought the horses together. It was the wild man. I realized the wild man had taken Silver Birch to the stallion's enclosure in the middle of the night. We locked eyes together, and I heard a voice in my head. She needs a new foal. I brought them together. This will be good for her spirit. She needs to be a mother again. She needs to feel needed. The hairy man then bolted away from the enclosure, and when he'd glided away, he looked at me over his shoulders, and I knew in that quintessential moment the wild man knew exactly what he was doing. He understood the language of the natural world in ways we could never imagine. So Silver Birch did become pregnant. She gave birth to a beautiful foal, and once again she became the fun-loving, easy-going horse we'd always remembered. She was back to being her old self again. I never told Farmer Eldon about the wild man's intervention. He simply thought I was the one who had gone against his wishes and got Silver Birch impregnated. He slapped me on the back in congratulations. Well done for not listening to me, Cole. You understand that horse far better than I do. She certainly needed this foal. She's a transformed character thanks to you.
Wow, that's incredible, Gramps. So the wild man helped Silver Birch?
Yes, he did indeed. He understood the mare. He knew exactly what she needed. He could speak the language of horses.
After my grandfather's amazing story, I was confident that I would see the ghost in the red plaid shirt again, and the wild man. But the weirdest thing of all is I actually never did, even though I continued to visit my grandparents for every single holiday, and I was so disappointed not to see them. I began to hope that the ghost in the red plaid shirt had found his peace and crossed over to the other side. Of course, I did not realize that even after my own grandfather's death, that this story had not come to its completion yet, but I would bring the final chapter to a close in ways I never envisaged possible, and that maybe my encounter with the ghost in the red plaid shirt and the hairy man himself had not come to a fortuitous end after all. So there we are. That is the end of part 3 of our story. Part 4 is tomorrow night, and I look forward to you joining me then. Until next time, goodbye and good night.